The moment I stepped into the dorm, I could feel my excitement buzzing like a malfunctioning power cell. A new life, new discipline, a fresh start. I was ready. And then, there she was. My alien roommate, casually sprawled across the floor like she owned the place. Luminous skin reflecting the faint hum of the overhead lights. Multiple arms lazily flopping in every direction. "I'm just tired," she murmured, eyes half-lidded, as if gravity itself was an inconvenience she had no patience for. That was my first introduction to the most persistent problem I would ever face. No matter what, she somehow ended up wrapped around me. At first, I assumed she was joking. I crouched to pick up her floating sneaker-like appendages and got an unexpected brush of her hand on my arm, sending a shock of something embarrassingly pleasant up my spine. Do you need help?" I stammered. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, a lazy smile curling across her face. "No, just tired," she said again, voice dripping with sweet innocence that somehow contradicted her total disregard for personal space. Before I could move, her body shifted, and one arm slithered over my shoulder as though claiming it by default. I froze, feeling like a human prop in some alien performance art. I tried to carefully extricate myself, gently nudging her leg aside, but her other arm lazily snaked around my torso. It was almost like she had a sixth sense for where I might try to escape. Every inch I moved, she adjusted, molding perfectly against me as if physics itself had been rewritten to ensure maximum proximity. I swallowed, wondering if I should call it a bonding ritual, or if I'd just been conscripted into an alien cuddle trap. The first night was the worst. I had barely unpacked when she decided to nap, on top of me. I had never felt the weight and warmth of an alien body draped so intimately across my lap. My attempts at subtle repositioning were met with gentle resistance. Her glowing eyes flicked open just enough to watch me, and the corners of her mouth curled in what I could only describe as smug satisfaction. I wanted to scold her, but all that came out was a strangled laugh, half frustration, half disbelief. Days blended into increasingly ridiculous patterns. She would claim to be just tired, in the middle of a combat simulation, and somehow, by the time I blinked, she was tangled around my arm, her head resting against my shoulder as if I were a human-sized pillow. Instructors paused, eyebrows raised, muttering about team cohesion, and I was left blushing under the glow of her bioluminescent skin. I could feel the slight vibration of her chest as she breathed, the rhythmic hum of her alien metabolism thrumming through the air around us. It was both distracting and hypnotic, though I didn't dare think about it too much. Even in the zero-G hallways, the pattern continued. She would float past me, mid-step, and somehow end up draped over my back, one leg curled around my waist, two arms loosely gripping my shoulders. I toppled into walls, storage crates, anything solid enough to break my fall, while she snoozed happily, occasionally murmuring in a language that sounded like wind chimes and distant laughter. I didn't even have the energy to protest most of the time. I simply caught her as best I could and hoped gravity, or something approximating it, would cooperate. Mornings were the worst. I had learned to anticipate the slow, creeping approach of her sleepiness. It would start innocuously, a yawn, a stretch, a half-lidded gaze that begged for comfort. Then, without warning, she would flop onto the nearest surface, and inevitably, that surface was me. I would sit there, trying to pretend nothing had happened as she draped herself like a living blanket, arms curling into awkward but undeniably intimate positions. I told myself it was harmless, but every contact sent jolts of awareness through me. I hadn't anticipated that, just tired, could be so aggressively affectionate. Even the smallest movements became a negotiation. If I needed to get a datapad from my desk, she would manage to curl her tail, or the closest approximation of one, around my wrist, forcing me to inch forward in a ridiculous slow-motion dance. Every attempt to extricate myself was met with a soft, sleepy murmur and a slight tightening of her grip. She wasn't malicious. She wasn't even aware of the chaos she was causing. She was just, consistently, inevitably tired. By the time I collapsed onto the bed after a particularly grueling day of training, she was already there, half asleep on the floor. I had barely sat down when she rolled over, arms and legs draping across me, and whispered, "I'm just tired." And somehow, despite all the chaos, all the awkwardness, and all the internal panic, I found myself laughing, holding her close. I didn't know if it was the exhaustion or the absurdity, but in that moment, I realized this was going to be a very long, very strange semester, and somehow, I didn't entirely mind. Mornings quickly became a battlefield of stealth and strategy. Every time I thought I had mastered the routine, she proved otherwise. Breakfast was the worst. I would carefully fry synthetic eggs while trying to maintain a safe distance, only to feel the sudden brush of her hand against my arm, or a leg curling around mine. "I'm just tired," she murmured, voice syrupy with innocence, but the gleam in her half-lidded eyes said otherwise. I tried to slide the plate away, but it tipped slightly, sending a perfectly cooked egg spinning in zero-G like a satellite orbiting a star. She giggled in her sleep, a soft, alien trill that made my chest ache in the most inconvenient way. Training wasn't any better. The zero-G combat simulations were supposed to be about discipline and agility, but she had a remarkable knack for collapsing at the exact moment I was in motion. One second I was dodging a mock laser, and the next, her body was draped over my shoulders like a living backpack, her arms tangling around my torso as if I were a piece of furniture. I tried to push her off, but her limbs were slippery and surprisingly strong, leaving me flailing and spinning like an amateur astronaut, while my fellow cadets dodged sparks from our collision with the wall panels. I ended up pinned against the ceiling with her gently humming into my ear, and I couldn't help but laugh despite the embarrassment. Even the simplest tasks became absurd trials of endurance. I once tried to retrieve a datapad from the top shelf, thinking I could sneak past her nap. She noticed. The next moment, she floated down, a tendril of hair brushing my face, and somehow managed to entwine herself around my waist as if gravity had a personal vendetta. I stumbled, collided with a supply crate, and nearly sent a stack of emergency kits hurtling across the room. She stirred slightly, murmured, "So comfy," and promptly went back to sleep. By then, I was convinced she might actually be testing the limits of human patience, and mine in particular. The hallway was no sanctuary either. Zero-G corridors should have made movement simple, but she had an uncanny ability to appear wherever I was. She would drift past in her usual sleepy haze, and before I knew it, she was wrapped around me mid-spin, dangling arms and legs in impossible angles, like some absurd marionette. I ended up toppling into a group of cadets, their yells echoing through the corridor, while she giggled in her sleep, unaware of the chaos. I scrambled to upright myself, heart pounding, trying to ignore the warmth radiating from her as I disentangled our bodies in what could only be described as a slapstick display of failure. There was a growing pattern to her naps. No matter the time of day or location, she always ended up in physical contact with me. In the training room, she sprawled across the equipment, one leg draped over my shoulder as if claiming ownership of my very presence. While I attempted to adjust her, she would shift slightly, sigh contentedly, and murmur in a mixture of alien syllables that sounded suspiciously like teasing. I couldn't tell if she was mocking me or merely expressing comfort, and the ambiguity only made it harder to concentrate. Even in public areas, she found ways to collapse in the most inconvenient spots. One afternoon, we were supposed to meet instructors for a lecture, and she promptly flopped onto the seat beside me, stretching her arm across the armrest and brushing against my side. I squirmed, tried to ignore the subtle pulse of warmth radiating from her skin, and whispered for her to move slightly. She murmured sleepily, "Just tired," and rolled even closer, like a cat claiming territory. My face burned, and I realized that no matter how hard I tried, her tired state was a weapon of affectionate chaos I had no defense against. Friends started noticing. Whispers spread through the dorm and training halls, subtle bets placed on how long it would take before she napped on me again. Their amused laughter only added to the awkwardness. I tried to explain to them that it wasn't intentional, but they all smirked knowingly, as if the pattern had been obvious to everyone but me. Every time she yawned or stretched near me, a mixture of dread and anticipation surged through me, knowing full well she would inevitably end up wrapped around me again. By the end of the day, I had learned a few hard lessons. Attempting to resist was pointless. Avoidance only made her drift closer, limbs stretching in ways that defied logic yet felt oddly intimate. I realized that part of the chaos was almost comforting: the warmth, the gentle hum of her breathing, the way she molded herself into whatever position ensured maximum proximity. Despite the frustration, the embarrassment, and the constant social ridicule, I found myself waiting for it, anticipating her presence, wondering what absurdly intimate position she would claim next. That night, as I collapsed onto the bunk exhausted from zero-G tumbling, cooking disasters, and general chaos, she floated in beside me without a sound. Limbs entangled, her head resting against my shoulder, she whispered again. "I'm just tired." I sighed, laughed, and gently adjusted her position, realizing that resistance was futile. Somehow, amidst all the absurdity, I was starting to enjoy it. Things only got worse, or better, depending on how you looked at it, during mission briefings. We were supposed to be in full focus mode, cadets lined up, eyes forward, ready to absorb critical tactical information. Instead, I found her, predictably, draped across my lap. Somehow, in the 15 seconds it took me to glance at the instructor, she had slipped past my awareness, limbs folding around me like a mischievous puzzle I had no hope of solving. Her head rested against my chest, her warm breath brushing my neck, and I froze, torn between embarrassment and the inexplicable comfort radiating from her body. I tried to extricate myself with delicate movements, subtle shifts designed to appear casual. She, of course, adjusted simultaneously, curling a leg over mine and tightening an arm around my torso. A soft, sleepy trill escaped her, almost musical, and I had to fight the urge to respond in kind. My heart raced in ways it had never done during any training session or exam. Around us, cadets shifted nervously, some trying to avoid eye contact, others whispering bets on how long it would take before the "just tired" nap ended. I muttered incoherent protests under my breath, which were met with a gentle squeeze from her hand. That was the problem. Everything she did was gentle, innocent, and perfectly designed to make me melt. During zero-G exercises, she became increasingly inventive. One moment she would be floating past, the next, somehow dangling around my neck like a sleepy scarf. I would flail, trying to maintain balance, arms flailing to push her away without actually touching her in ways that would feel wrong. It was physically impossible. My own movements only seemed to encourage her. She would murmur alien words that sounded suspiciously like laughter, and I realized she wasn't just sleeping, she was deliberately wrapping herself around me, testing boundaries in the most adorable, infuriating way. Cooking didn't offer respite either. I had learned to anticipate her approach, but zero-G eggs were volatile. She would slide onto the counter while I cracked an egg, one leg hooking around my arm, her hair brushing my face. A slight nudge, and the egg would spin off into orbit. She hummed in her sleep, a soft, rhythmic vibration, as if approving the trajectory of my cooking mishaps. I groaned, ducking to avoid another airborne mess, realizing that nothing I did could maintain personal space. Every surface, every corridor, every task was an opportunity for her to assert her, just tired, dominion. Hints of her species bonding rituals became apparent in fleeting, almost comical ways. She would glow faintly when asleep near me, the light pulsing gently like a heartbeat. When I adjusted her position, her body seemed to relax in a way that suggested trust, or perhaps something more. The realization hit me suddenly: these naps weren't just naps. They were a form of communication, a quiet, intimate ritual that I had unknowingly become a part of. My thoughts raced between panic and fascination. Could humans ever understand this? Could I navigate this absurd intimacy without making it awkward or violating boundaries? There were moments when I accidentally discovered new aspects of her behavior. While trying to move her off a simulator console, my hand brushed her shoulder, and she made a soft, pleased sound. I froze, unsure what to do. Was this a reaction to human touch or merely sleep pleasure? Every movement became a game of guesswork and subtle cues. I learned quickly that direct resistance was counterproductive. The more I tried, the more entangled we became. By the end of one particularly chaotic session, I was practically pinned to a wall, her limbs twisting around mine in impossible angles, and I laughed helplessly, realizing there was no escaping. Her teasing, subtle but deliberate, intensified. One night she stirred in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like, "You're a good pillow," and adjusted herself to drape across my chest in an almost impossibly comfortable position. My face burned as I tried to gently move her, only for her to tighten slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a reminder of the rules I hadn't been briefed on. I realized that she wasn't just sleeping, she was interacting, engaging with me, and somehow making me complicit in her chaotic, affectionate antics. By this point, cadets around us were openly commenting, whispering wagers, and laughing at our repeated disasters. I didn't care. Despite the embarrassment, the constant flailing, the zero-G tumbles, I felt a strange thrill. Her proximity was dangerous, intoxicating, and if I admitted it, utterly addictive. I found myself anticipating the next collapse, the next accidental rap, wondering how she would drape herself next and what small, teasing noise would escape her lips as she claimed me for her nap. And in those rare, quiet moments between chaos, when she briefly opened her eyes to glance at me with sleepy, glowing affection, I realized that the absurdity, the embarrassment, the slapstick disaster, it was all part of something larger. She had made me a part of her world, a willing participant in her alien rhythms, and though I had no idea what was coming next, I knew I didn't want it to stop. The next day escalated faster than I ever could have imagined. She appeared almost everywhere at once, though of course she was only one body. It was a talent I would never understand. One second, I was organizing my gear in the storage bay, and the next, she floated down from above, limbs draping over my shoulders and torso, soft laughter tumbling from her lips as she murmured, "Just tired." In zero-G, I had no leverage, no chance to resist. I toppled backward into a pile of supplies tangled in cords, straps, and floating helmets, while she happily snuggled into the mess like it was the most natural thing in the universe. The cadets around us tried to intervene, but any movement I made to extricate myself only pulled her closer. One arm curled around my neck, a leg hooked across my waist, and somehow, her other limbs wrapped around my torso in a perfect, if impossible, embrace. I flailed helplessly, knocking over crates, manuals, and even a small maintenance drone, all while she hummed a soft, alien lullaby that made my chest tighten in ways I wasn't ready to admit. By the time I landed on the floor, groaning and utterly defeated, she had shifted slightly, smiling sleepily, and whispered, "You're very warm." I could only blink, breathless, both from exhaustion and from the ridiculous, intoxicating closeness. I tried to devise strategies, pillows, gravity boots, even remotely controlled floating cushions, but nothing worked. She adapted to every countermeasure, as if she had predicted it from the beginning. The more I tried, the more absurd the results. During a zero-G combat drill, she suddenly floated toward me mid-spin, arms and legs wrapping around my torso, causing us to spin uncontrollably down the corridor. I crashed into lockers, bounced off walls, and somehow ended up in the middle of the training room, limbs tangled, both of us laughing helplessly at the chaos. Every attempt at resistance became part of her game, a playful challenge I couldn't win, and secretly didn't want to. Then, in a quiet, rare pause between collisions, I noticed something. The faint glow of her skin was pulsing in time with her breathing, brighter and more vivid whenever she was near me. A soft, alien vibration thrummed through the air, almost like a heartbeat. Slowly, pieces fell together. This wasn't random. Her naps, her persistent rapping, her insistence on closeness, it was part of a ritual. A bonding process specific to her species. Somehow, I had become part of it, the human element in her affectionate chaos, and it was intoxicating. I felt my pulse quicken as I realized I didn't want to resist anymore. I stopped struggling, letting her adjust herself as she wished. Her limbs curled around me, head resting against my shoulder, her warmth radiating in waves that made it impossible to think clearly. She murmured something that sounded like, "Finally!" A sleepy, satisfied sigh that echoed with a mix of trust and amusement. I laughed, shaky and breathless, finally acknowledging the absurd, delightful intimacy we had stumbled into. The rest of the day turned into a spectacle. She collapsed in every conceivable location, on benches, counters, training pods, always ending up in contact with me. Each nap carried the same combination of chaos, warmth, and soft alien sounds that made my heart pound in equal parts panic and desire. Fellow cadets could only watch, laughing and whispering bets on how long before the next wraparound occurred, while I resigned myself to being her living pillow, her unwilling but willing partner in this unpredictable game. Finally, as evening fell, we floated into the dorm's main room together, limbs tangled, hair and tails overlapping in ways that defied logic, laughing softly at the ridiculousness of it all. She murmured again, "I'm just tired," and I realized she wasn't joking. I wasn't fighting it anymore either. I reached out, adjusting her gently, pulling her closer, and for the first time, the chaos felt purposeful. There was affection in every curve of her body against mine, in every soft hum and sleepy giggle. It was intimate, it was alien, it was chaotic, and somehow, it was perfect. Even when we finally settled into the sleeping quarters, wrapped in blankets, zero-G lines, and our own entangled limbs, I couldn't help but grin. The absurdity, the embarrassment, the repeated collisions, they were part of something larger, a bond neither of us fully understood, yet both of us were participating in willingly. Her soft, glowing skin against mine, the gentle vibrations of her breathing, the weightless hug that wrapped around us both, it was the pinnacle of absurd intimacy and chaotic romance. And somewhere in the background, a fellow cadet whispered, "They're still at it." And the rest of the dorm laughed. I only smiled, holding her closer, knowing that every, just tired, moment, every ridiculous collapse, every chaotic wraparound had led to this perfect, impossible connection. Chaos and romance, laughter and warmth, alien and human, completely intertwined, and neither of us wanting to be anywhere else.